Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to the show. My name is Anwar Mir and you are watching Let's Talk. Today we have a very special program where we are going to be having a comparative approach in relation to politics and the parliamentary system in both the United Kingdom and Bangladesh. Now, with me to discuss this are two gentlemen who actually require no introduction, but of course protocol requires me to do precisely that. They are both very distinguished parliamentarians, very successful in their own field with their own impressive backgrounds, and we'll hear a little bit more about them later on. But without further ado, allow me to begin by introducing you to the MP on my right. His name is Mr. Mahmud Chowdhury MP, a member of Parliament in Bangladesh, covering the region known as Sylhet 3. Most of you will know that this covers Fenchurganj and part of Balaganj. And in terms of his portfolio... And South Shurma. Thank you very much for adding that. In terms of his portfolio, he is also a member of the Parliamentary Defence Committee, a member of the Expatriates Committee, a Senate member of the Shah Jalal University and the Sylhet Agricultural University, and also a panel speaker of Parliament. Mr. Chowdhury, assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for joining us. Welcome to the show. And to my left, ladies and gentlemen, is, as I say, a parliamentarian from the United Kingdom, someone who, until very recently, held the greatest majority in terms of the votes in the United Kingdom. But in terms of 2015, he held the biggest vote. He was the only person to secure in excess of 40,000 votes in the United Kingdom. Now, he too has had a history of portfolios, but more recently he is on the education and select, and he's been a minister for some 12 years, and these include, of course, the Treasury and other departments. He's also a part of the Faith Envoy, the Labour Party Faith Envoy, and I need say little else, to be perfectly frank, because I know that the viewers of Channel S have known him for a number of years, and he is, of course, Stephen Timms MP. Stephen, welcome to the show, Mr. Timms.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Welcome, Sam. Thank you very much for joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be putting questions to both our distinguished guests. They will cover different areas of politics, including not only the parliamentary system, but also different areas such as the democracy itself, education, the economy, and so on and so forth. If I may begin by asking Mr. Timms to tell us what he thinks, not about the parliamentary system in the United Kingdom, but what he thinks from his experience of Bangladesh, because he has visited Bangladesh a number of times. In fact, very recently, in February, he was part of a delegation that went to Bangladesh and indeed Sylhet as well. And I would like to ask you, Mr. Timms, first of all, you are, of course, a good friend of the community. Our readership, our audience actually are very fond of you. But in terms of Bangladesh, what is your view from the experiences that you have encountered during your visits in Bangladesh?
I've visited a number of times. In fact, I think it's 20 years since the first time I was in Bangladesh. So it was very interesting on this recent visit with Labour Friends of Bangladesh in February to make a comparison between what I found when I first went 20 years ago, how things are today. And one of the most dramatic changes that I observed was that so many more children are in school now than was the case 20 years ago. I think that's been a remarkable achievement on the part of the authorities in Bangladesh with international support, a very important achievement. I visited a BRAC school on this visit, as I have sometimes in the past, but I vividly remember in Sylhet 20 years ago meeting a youngster who was working in a hotel, no chance to go to school because he had to support his family economically. And I think it's great that the incidence of that is so much less now than it was 20 years ago. Very impressive achievement. We had a wonderful visit. We were made very, very welcome. I think all of us parliamentarians who took part enjoyed the visit no end. And there was a real sense, I felt, of very substantial economic progress that Bangladesh has made. Sylhet city looked prosperous to me. I watched cartload after cartload piled high with wonderful looking vegetables on the morning as we were leaving Sylhet city, and I came back with a very positive sense of the economic progress and the social progress that's been made.
Absolutely. And in terms of the academic progress that you've touched on, Bangladesh is producing a huge amount of graduates. The literacy rate has gone up considerably from what it was. And of course, in terms of the prosperity, not just vegetables, of course, but if you see the economic development there, Bangladesh GDP is what, 7% at the moment? I mean, in comparison to somewhere like the United Kingdom, it's quite an achievement, isn't it?
It is, and it's been sustained over quite a long period now, and year after year, that sort of economic growth is obviously going to have a very positive impact, and you can see that on the streets, I think.
What sort of challenges do you think Bangladesh faces, and where would you like to see it in the years to come?
Well, of course, there are still development challenges. There are still many people struggling and facing a good deal of hardship. There are still children who are not in school. But from the point of view of the world community, Bangladesh has been a development success over the last 15, 20 years, and I think a lot of credit is due to the authorities in the country and everyone who's contributed to that. But of course, there's more to be done. We were all horrified by the Rana Plaza catastrophe of a couple of years ago. There clearly needs to be, and indeed is now, a programme of factory inspections to try and make sure that doesn't happen again, and British companies investing in Bangladesh need to take their responsibility seriously in this respect. And there's more to be done on education, but I think anyone visiting Bangladesh today will have a strong sense that the country is moving firmly in the right direction. I think politically there are challenges. We should no doubt we'll touch on that. I thought it was a terrible mistake for the one of the main parties to boycott the elections last time round. I hope that won't happen again. I think we do need a multi-party democracy in order that the country can flourish.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to you in a short while. Mr. Chowdhury, a glowing endorsement of the achievements of the government and the progress that has been made over the years. What would you like to say in response about what's going on in Bangladesh?
First of all, I'd like to thank Tim for his visit to Bangladesh, because the time when he visited Bangladesh, that was worldwide a bad publicity about Bangladesh, that Bangladesh is not safe, this and that. And just before his visit, the Conservative Party visited as well. And during that time, the school teachers from Cardiff, 10 of them, they visited Bangladesh. They went to my school as well. And I'm sure you found nothing of this sort, because as far as Bangladesh is concerned, it's a bad publicity going on worldwide, which is not true. I object on that, because at that time, a lot of Americans also came. The Europeans also went, and they found nothing of that sort. As far as the education, Tim mentioned about the education, because you see, Sylhet once upon a time used to be very highly educated people in Sylhet, but there was a trend when people started to come to England. But the generation here in England, they're also highly educated, the Sylheti generation. But at the moment, in the district of Sylhet in Bangladesh, the literacy rate is 75% plus. And also what happens is the present government, the Sheikh Hasina's government, Awami League government, we are sort of on the first day of January, 330 million books we give it to the children. So that helps, because before the students didn't have the opportunity to have the books, new books especially. And as far as the infrastructure is concerned, because I basically try to concentrate on the infrastructure of the country, because unless and until you have a good infrastructure in the country, then you can't really, the GDP, in my expectation, it would have been about 8%. It should have been 8%, I'd say. You mentioned about the Rana Plaza, because Rana Plaza, it's different, it related to the garments industry, but you see, a lot of worse thing happens to China, because they're the leaders in the garments industry. But Rana Plaza, it was a bad incident for us. But after this, the Accord, the Alliance, the BSCI, this sort of organization entered into Bangladesh, and the government helped them to make the garments industry compliant. So at the moment, I think the garments industry, 80% of them are fully compliant. and it's doing very well. And as far as the export of garments industry is concerned, even about the incident of Rana Plaza, it did affect, but it didn't affect in a very bad way, because we have sort of increased by about 10-20% export from Bangladesh.
Let me ask you this. I mean, you were a member of the diaspora here in the United Kingdom. You were a pioneering businessman here, a philanthropist, and of course you had substantial business interests in Bangladesh as well. So you're familiar with the parliamentary system here.
Yes.
Now, you have in Bangladesh responsibilities as a member of parliament of a considerably larger constituency in terms of numbers of people. In comparison to, say, the United Kingdom. Would you say that the workload for a member of parliament such as yourself is, comparatively speaking, a lot more, with a lot more work to do as well than the parliamentarians in the United Kingdom?
Yes, that's definitely that, because our workload is about, if I calculate that, it will be 10 times more than what you are doing, because we have to act like a councillor. In the city corporation councillor, from his job to a member of the parliament to lawmaking and so on and so forth, because the people's expectation to a parliamentarian or to an MP is about the roads, about the infrastructure, about the poverty, about food and everything. We have to look after. For instance, I stay in my constituency 4 nights a week. And my political surgery lasts for about 2 a.m. Almost like every day, because the jam and the people's demand in a very short period of time is very difficult to sort of handle, and everything we have to sort out. But although in the British Parliament, as you know, I've been educated in Bath City, and I was a student union leader at that time, and Benazir Bhutto was president of Oxford University. I was president of Bath. And I have visited the British Parliament many times. But the differences we see the differences. It's a comfort here, but it's a different kind of comfort for us being MP. But we have to do loads of hard work. The places you have visited, Tim, we have to go in the grassroots level, and that is very difficult for us. So I hope our local government becomes gradually stronger, because you see what happens is the local government is there in existence, but their job, their task, and their sincerity, I personally feel they fail in their sincerity. So we MPs must be involved as guardian of that, especially Upazilas, the sub-districts.
Thank you very much. Mr. Timms, in terms of the United Kingdom, of course, the country of Bangladesh is rather young, whereas in Britain we've had democracy for a long time. We've been able to refine our systems to such an extent that we have various strata of government, everything, all the systems seem to work by and large. And the work, relatively speaking, tends to be a lot more defined. So, for example, as a member of parliament, you yourself would have very defined roles, and you would not have to perhaps get involved in the kind of way that Mr. Chowdhury perhaps does with his different levels of government and local government and so forth.
Well, it's certainly true that there's a well-established local authority system. I work closely with my local authority and the national government parliamentary system as well. But I certainly want to make it clear, however, that as an MP in the UK, you definitely need to deal with ordinary people. I do regular surgeries which are packed out, and particularly in an area like the one that I represent here in East London, there's a lot of demand, a lot of need, a lot of issues that people want to raise.
Mr. Timms, what I'm trying to get at is that we want to see a day and an age where people like Mr. Chowdhury shouldn't have to stay till 2 o'clock in the morning having those surgeries. He shouldn't have to oversee certain levels of local government which aren't effectively working because ultimately the buck stops with him. So he has to make sure that everything runs smoothly. Luckily in the United Kingdom, we've been able to sort all that out. What advice would you give to a nation, a young nation such as Bangladesh, in terms of democracy? Because I suspect, do you have any concerns about the democracy of Bangladesh?
Well, one issue that I would pick out is one I've mentioned already, the absence of an opposition in the Bangladesh Parliament at the moment. I think that is a real difficulty, and I'm hoping that by the time of the next general election that will be resolved. I think there does need to be a multi-party democracy. There does need to be the ability of the voters to change the government.
Well, maybe Mr. Chowdhury's party is so popular that everybody decides to support that.
No, I think
it may happen.
Yes. I think
I'm just asking hypothetically.
Indeed.
Yeah.
I think, the reality is there are always different issues, there are always different perspectives, and Parliament needs to reflect that. Otherwise it can't effectively do its job, particularly in the long term.
Right.
And so I think it's also the case there needs to be a mechanism by which the voters can change the government from one party to the next without undue disturbance and difficulty. And I know there have been difficulties in the past in Bangladesh there. So I'm very encouraged by the progress that I've seen in the period that I've been visiting Bangladesh, but certainly on the democracy front, there's more to be done.
And what is the British government's position on Bangladesh? How do they regard it? They've seen it evolve. They've seen how dynamic it is, certainly in terms of education, which we've touched on, and to some extent the economy as well. How does the British government view Bangladesh?
Well, I can't speak for the British government because I'm not a member of the British government. I'm a member of the opposition. But what I can say is...
In your view,
yes,
the approach of the United Kingdom.
Well, I think from Britain's point of view, Bangladesh is a very important country. Not least, of course, because there are a very large number of Bangladeshis whose home is in the UK. So that means there are very close connections between Britain and Bangladesh. Economically, Bangladesh is an increasingly important country. And one of the things I want to see more of is the very large number of very bright, very talented Bangladeshi young people in Britain growing up now, understanding their way very effectively around how things work in Britain, but also well connected in Bangladesh, can take advantage of those connections to build in the coming generation really close economic and cultural links between Bangladesh and Britain. I think that would be a good thing for Bangladesh. I think it would be an excellent thing for Britain as well. So I think Bangladesh is going to continue to be an increasingly important country from a UK perspective.
Absolutely, but the difficulty, isn't it, Mr. Timms, is that despite the fact that Bangladesh is producing a lot of talented people with a lot of skills, Britain is making it extremely difficult for those skills to be shared and the UK to benefit from those sorts of skills, because the immigration system is such that, for example, highly skilled chefs are finding it increasingly difficult to come and work and train other chefs in the United Kingdom. These sorts of things are worrying the diaspora here. Do you have any observations on that?
Well,
and it's not just chefs, of course, it's the IT sector as well, all sorts of other sectors.
Across the economy, employers are expressing increasing concern about the difficulties they have in recruiting the people they need into jobs they have in the UK. Now, part of the solution is improving training, education, skills development in the UK. And I'd certainly like to see a bigger programme of chef training, for example, for young people in the UK who can look forward to a career in the very successful restaurant business that we've got in Britain now. I think that's part of the answer. But I do think as well the government needs to recognise more fully than the current government does the benefits for the UK when very able people come to live and work in this country.
And do you think that the changes that the present Secretary of State for the Home Office, Theresa May, the present policies that she has, do you and your party agree with the immigration rules, the changes that she has brought in, and the ongoing changes that she threatens to bring in?
Well, no, I think the Home Secretary is making some mistakes. One of the mistakes, in my view, is an underestimation of the value to the UK of students from overseas coming and studying in Britain. I think when that happens, and those students eventually go back to their own countries, often to prominent and successful positions, if they've had a British education, that's excellent for the UK, because it means there are very close ties and the ability to trade and relate to leading people in Bangladesh or whichever other country is in the future is a really great asset for the UK. I think the current government is undervaluing the importance for our future of attracting young people to come and study in Britain.
To be fair to the Conservative government, your party, wouldn't they have done the same thing? Because when you were in power, it wasn't quite as accommodating. And surely in 2015, would the Labour Party be saying that they would want to increase net migration, or certainly provide for certain sectors to actually be accommodated?
Well, we were much more welcoming in government to students from overseas, and actually British universities and colleges flourished under Labour. Today, countries like Australia, Canada, to some extent the US, are being much more welcoming to students from many parts of the world than we are. I think that's a mistake. I think we should return to the very successful policies that the Labour government had in this area.
Mr. Timms, thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, we must go on to a short break. When we come back, we will be carrying on this very important discussion about the comparative approach in terms of politics in both the United Kingdom and indeed Bangladesh. Do stay tuned. Don't go anywhere. We will see you soon, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. You're watching Let's Talk with me, Anwar Mir, and today we are having a discussion on politics, in particular the parliamentary system, and of course the salient issues which encompass all of what makes a country flourish. With me to discuss this issue are two distinguished members of parliament. To my right is Mr. Mahmud Chowdhury MP, who is the Member of Parliament for Sylhet 3, and to my left is the Member of Parliament for East Ham, Mr. Stephen Timms MP. Now, just before we went off air, we were having a discussion about Bangladesh itself and each other's views about how Bangladesh is progressing. I'm going to begin the second segment by asking Mr. Chowdhury, in terms of the economy, because I know as you've got a business background, you may be able to assist us with this. In terms of the economy, we've seen a dynamic shift in the United Kingdom from a manufacturing industry to more of a service type of economy, if you like, in the United Kingdom. Whereas in Bangladesh, we see something very slightly different. We see a tremendous manufacturing base, and in fact the garments industry is probably one of the biggest industries, not only in Bangladesh, but in terms of the world. It's competing with very important players. What would you be able to enlighten our viewers with about the manufacturing base of Bangladesh and the industry in particular?
First of all, Bangladesh, as you know, that we have started very poorly in the garments industry, but we could secure the second position in the world. After China, Bangladesh is the largest manufacturer. And at that time when we started, it started in a scattered way. But now all these compliant industries are taking place and we are doing very well in the world market. The other manufacturing industry at the moment, the second and third one, I would say. The second one is shipbuilding. Shipbuilding, Bangladesh is doing very well. And the other one is medicine manufacturing, pharmaceutical industries. It's doing very well as well. So given the opportunity, like gas, electricity, infrastructure, we could do even better than what it is. As you know, that we are a little bit short of gas. For that, our power plants and other industries suffered a little bit. Otherwise, GDP would have gone up. And at that time, you see, before, we had only 14 mine for the gas. Now we have 44. So they're working on the British companies as well, working, American companies working, and eventually will, yes, gas. So gas will increase eventually. But one mistake we did by giving gas to CNGs, like the transportation. If we did give CNG for the transportation, I think the GDP would have been at least 1% more than what it is now. So the present government, our Awami League government, have decided to stop giving CNGs to the petrol pumps, and we have already reduced 10 taka, which is near enough. 10 taka is how much? About 10 pence. We have reduced the petroleum price in Bangladesh, so that will encourage the people to go and buy petrol more than rather than the CNG, and CNG will eventually go for the industries, and that means GDP. GDP will increase probably in the next years.
What would you like to see in order to be able to have a more dynamic economy? I mean, you've got a young population of working age. You have a lot of natural resources as well. Of course, you have a lot of labour. What about foreign investment or other sorts of things? What would be good for Bangladesh? What does Bangladesh need right now? Yeah,
Bangladesh needs right now is foreign investments. But you see, very happily, I would like to say is that in last year, the foreign investment has gone up by 44%. So that means, you see, the foreign investors are willing to come and invest, because Bangladesh has become the second most attracted country after India for foreign investment. And the Americans, the British, the Europeans, the Chinese are actually implementing the contracts at the moment, like contractors. They're not actually investing in Bangladesh. Japan, JICA, they're also investing in Bangladesh. These are also helping. Can I just give you a small stats on that? Because in 2009, when we started the government, our Bangladesh bank reserve was only $6 billion US. Now it is $28 billion US. You see, our per capita income was 597. Now per capita income is 1,444. So that you can see the increase in there. And the poverty level has also reduced, and it was about 34%. Now it is 22.2%. So everything is going in the right direction. The education, the food, as you know, the Bangladesh, Dr. Kissinger once upon a said that it's a bottomless basket, but it is no longer a bottomless basket. At that time, we used to provide food for 75 million people. Now we are providing food for at least 160 million people, and we are not short of food. And the infrastructure development is going on in a very, very big way. Like you know about the Padma Bridge. And Padma Bridge, with our own funding, finance, 40% of the work has already been completed. And also the river tunnels in Chittagong, the work is going on. Dhaka, Chittagong, the dual carriageway, 4 lanes, it's been completed. And also in the other district, like in Sylhet and other things. So, and also in 2009, when we started the government, we gave a budget for 56,000 crores taka worth of. But last budget we gave 300,000, 3 lakh taka worth of budget, and this time it will be 344 million.
Well, that's very informative, Mr. Chowdhury. I think it's quite remarkable about what's taking place. I mean, in the United Kingdom, for example, we regard the British Parliament as the mother of all parliaments, and we have seen a lot of changes, however, taking place. Even as we speak, we've got the in-out referendum, which is imminent. We have the mayoralty, which is imminent as well. What would you say in terms of the kind of rather volatile politics that we see, something that we haven't seen before? I mean, in terms of the European the question, we've got two sides in what appears to be a rather fragmented debate, and even in the mayoralty, we've got a shall we say, an interesting debate taking place there as well.
We've got some very important elections coming up over the next couple of months, exactly as you say. Obviously, in the mayoral election, I'm campaigning for Sadiq Khan, the Labour candidate. I very much hope he succeeds. We're seeing what, for me, is a pretty unpleasant campaign from the Conservative Party, fronted by Zach Goldsmith, a divisive campaign. I very much hope the electorate will see through that and support, as the opinion polls suggest they will, Sadiq Khan, but the Conservatives are throwing everything they can at this, and I don't think anyone can take for granted what the outcome is going to be. And then beyond that, as you say, we've got this huge decision about whether or not we should stay in the European Union. My view is that we should stay in the EU. I think it is undoubtedly in our economic interest to stay in, and I hope that'll be the outcome.
And this is something that I want to touch on in terms of the economic aspect, because of course countries such as Bangladesh would like to export their goods to a huge market such as Europe. What difference, if any, will it make if we were to come out of Europe?
Well, I'll tell you one difference it would make. Companies in countries like Bangladesh wanting to address the European market would no longer feel confident that they could locate their European headquarters in the UK. Because if the UK wasn't any longer in the European market, they would feel, perfectly understandably, that they would need to be in France or Germany or somewhere that was in the European market in order to address successfully, without fear of tariff barriers or other impediments, in order to address the European market. What I want is for people to be confident that if they're located in the UK, they can reach without hindrance the whole European market. That's the current position, because we're members of the European Union. I hope we continue to be members of the EU, so that will continue to be the case, and so that we can continue to attract the lion's share of overseas direct investment into the UK.
A significant contingent of our viewers, our audience, are actually located within the London area. And of course, as you touched on, the mayoral elections is something that is very interesting, and we're all keen to see what's going to happen. You mentioned Zach Goldsmith, but to be fair to him, he's doing very well in the sense that he's very likable. He's been able to attract a very diverse vote as well, despite the fact that certain policies that he has are not necessarily the kind of policies that different people would go for. But he's got a lot of support, hasn't he? He's got a lot of popularity, even amongst the communities.
He's certainly got a substantial amount of support, and as I say, I don't think the result next week can be taken for granted. But from my perspective, he's run, and the Conservative Party has run, a pretty unpleasant campaign. A divisive campaign that's attempted to divide people up on ethnic, on religious lines in a way that's, I think, pretty damaging. It looks to me as though the electorate is seeing through that and recognising that Sadiq is by some considerable margin the stronger of the two candidates. I hope that will be reflected in the result next week.
The situation, if we just go back to the British Bangladeshi community, in not just our hamlets, but in your area as well, in that part of East London as well, do you see the British Bangladeshi community, the younger generation particularly, improving in terms of their education, the economic betterment, and generally, because traditionally the East End has been a very deprived part of London, and the British Bangladeshi community have not been immune to the kind of challenges that have been. I mean, Mr. Chowdhury is from Bath and a very promising, prosperous businessman. Indeed. So he doesn't actually come into the equation, so it's completely different. No. But in terms of East London, it's completely different.
We have seen a really remarkable progress. I've talked about progress in Bangladesh over the last 20 years. We've seen remarkable progress in East London as well, not least in school performance. Our schools were not doing well 20 years ago, thanks, I must say, to the reforms introduced by the Labour government and the investment made by the Labour government in education in London. And the London Challenge was a huge success. We've seen a very dramatic improvement in standards, and undoubtedly we are seeing Bangladeshi young people in East London doing very much better as a result, taking full advantage of the opportunities that the reforms have provided. I was last night at a meeting in Parliament where we were having a debate involving my constituents about the EU referendum issue, and there were some young Bangladeshi students from Newham Collegiate Sixth Form there taking a very impressive part in the debate. Our member of the Youth Parliament, Sadia Sajid, made a very, very impressive speech about the advantages for Britain of staying in the EU. So I think we are seeing young people, Bangladeshi young people in East London doing well in their education, and I think we can be very confident about the achievements that they can look forward to in their lives in the UK in the future.
They still face quite a considerable number of challenges, especially in your constituency and neighbouring constituencies. For example, housing is a serious problem. The stock, a lot of it was sold off by the Conservative government, hasn't been replaced and replenished. What's being done by people like yourselves in order to address those challenges for the community?
Well, for me, the biggest solution, the biggest answer here, the biggest way forward will be to elect Sadiq Khan as Mayor of London next week, because he's the candidate who's identified the scale of the housing crisis. He's made it absolutely clear it will be his #1 priority.
Zach Goldsmith says the same.
Mayor. I think what you can see with Sadiq is a plan to actually tackle the problem, to get more homes built. As he says, he's a council house boy. He's going to tackle London's housing crisis. That's something that Zach Goldsmith certainly cannot say.
Very good. I'm going to just go back to Mr. Chowdhury. Now, of course, living standards in Bangladesh have improved. The country's become a lot more prosperous than in recent years. What kind of problems and challenges do the population of Bangladesh actually face? What would you like to see being addressed to be able to have a betterment for the people? Because what we take for granted in the United Kingdom, housing, healthcare, free healthcare and so forth, these are things which can only be a dream for the people of Bangladesh, surely.
You see, if for Bangladesh, what we have to do is, first of all, we have to concentrate more on the education. That's the first priority. And then we have to have the village infrastructure done for these youngsters to go to school properly. And these youngsters, when they have started, and they're doing very good results. And in my college, when the Cardiff 10 school teachers went, and one girl, she delivered a speech in English, and I was really amazed and surprised. How could she learn this sort of English from the school? So you see, these youngsters in Bangladesh at the moment, they're interlinked and they're connected worldwide. And probably you know that we have the biggest web portal in the whole world, because we have connected the primary schools, the high schools, the Union Parishad office and the local government office in that website. So everything, even my Prime Minister, if she wants to enter into my primary school, she can do that very easily. And we have different cells under the leadership of our Prime Minister to monitor these sort of things. And suddenly she does video conference in sub-district Upazila. She said, within half an hour, I want to speak to the UNO, that is Upazila Nirbahi Officer, and they will have to get ready. And she will ask all these questions. And whatever problems she finds, or even we find, we try to solve it immediately. And because of the internet connection, probably you know that 550 million people are connected with internet in Bangladesh. About 114 or 113 people are connected with mobile telephones. So this has changed the country in a different way, I would say. Before we couldn't even think about it. Now we think about it, and we are also implementing it. And all these schools before, is in one gap during the time of President Ershad, English was a secondary subject. And in fact, we started to ignore English subject. But now English subject has been given a priority, and for that reason, loads of kindergarten schools are in English medium, and students from the childhood, they're learning English, and they can speak English, they can communicate with English through internet and all that. That is a good thing. I think this education, the local infrastructure for my next generation, that is the first priority.
Thank you very much. And I'm just going to, just before I go on to our break, I just want to touch on something that you've said. You say that education is a priority. We have a lot of in Bangladesh, there are a lot of private institutions as well. So it seems like there's external investment. Is the government keeping up with that, or because it seems to be?
First of all, you see, to answer that, all the primary schools, we have to have tin shed schools.
Right.
But now from the World Bank funding, all the primary schools are properly built, concreted built. And we used to have few teachers. Now we have maximum 5-6 teachers. So that's a good thing. And the other thing is, you will see loads of schools, colleges, privately built. But the private schools and colleges are built but with good quality. I would say it's better than even the government quality. And from the private schools and all that, the students it's not that expensive, mind you. And they can come out of the country, they can go move everywhere in the world, they can be qualified in there. That's a good thing. So I prefer that to go on as well.
So you encourage the
Yes.
Private investment in the education
Yes.
sector, because of course you have your own education establishment as well,
Yes,
don't you?
that's not private, but that's for the common people.
Right.
I started with 17 students. Now I have 900 students. In every schools, colleges you go,
But I mean, the investment is coming from your private sources.
Yes.
That's right. Very good. Now, that's interesting. Ladies and gentlemen, we must go on to another break. When we come back, of course, we're going to continue this topic of the comparative approach of politics, both in the United Kingdom and, of course, in Bangladesh. So do stay with us, and we will be back very shortly. Assalamu alaikum, welcome back. You're watching Let's Talk with me, Anwar Mir, and today we are discussing politics in Bangladesh and the United Kingdom. And with me, just in case you've just tuned in, we have two very distinguished MPs. To my right, we have Mr. Mahmud Chowdhury MP, who is the Member of Parliament for Sylhet 3 in Bangladesh. And to my left, I have Stephen Timms MP for East Ham, Labour Party, of course. If I just begin this final segment by asking Mr. Chowdhury. Now, as you know, the UK-Bangladesh relationship, particularly in terms of trade, is very significant and very important. And as Mr. Timms says, not least because of the diaspora here in the United Kingdom, the historical links, and of course the present links that we have between the United Kingdom and Bangladesh. As you know, the MP, Member of Parliament for Bethnal Green and Bow, Roshnara Ali, has recently been made the trade envoy. How would you wish to see that relationship together with the significance of Roshnara Ali MP having that particular portfolio now? How would you like to see that develop?
First of all, I'd like to say a job well done. Because Roshnara Ali, she can speak Sylheti, she can speak Bangla, and she can speak English so nicely. And she's very close to the present government. And she can make friends very quickly. And as you know, that Britain is probably the biggest contributor in education in Bangladesh. So that's education. And business-wise, Britain and Bangladesh, I think we could do a lot better than what we are doing at the moment. Because our people living in this country, they can do common trades in a lot of things. And I think she would do very well. She will be an ideal choice for it. And lots of businesses can be done, because our businesses, unless and until you initiate something on a subject, on something you focus on, you don't get it. But I think she can do a sort of a business developer as such, so she can help us, the Bangladeshis, and she can help the British Bangladeshis as well as the origin British people. She would do very well, I think so. I'm very happy and delighted about it.
Are there any particular aspects that you would wish her to focus on and cooperate on?
Yes, I would sort of put my emphasis on one issue, that is the garments industry, because I think in Britain, Bangladeshi garments are a little bit less than the Europeans and the Americans and the other ones. So the garments industry, you see, it's a kind of industry that you don't have to invest. All you have to do is, like the British people I'm saying, all you have to do is give us some logistic support, some brains behind it, and put us in the right track. Because you see, at the end of the day, if you help a country, a lower middle earning country, if you help them to create, to make, and to earn, that will be much better than giving us aids and so on and so forth. We don't, as for now on, we don't need aids anymore. We need the brains behind, the support behind. And I think Rushnar Ali would do very well. And I would also ask you, Tim, to help us to achieve, rather than give us the money and we eat and off it goes. Don't want that anymore. The infrastructure, the other things, you can help us on. The JICA, Chinese, they are helping in a very, very big way. You are also helping. You did a lot of bridges for us. China did a lot of bridges for us. And Bangladesh is, as you know, after the Padma bridge, there will be only 2-3 bridges left. Then comes the railway. In the railway, you can help us, because on collection basis, toll collection basis, you can do the Sylhet-Dhaka railway in double truck, double line, and you get your money back in that way.
That's a very comprehensive view. May I just ask you, Mr. Timms, we're getting mixed signals from the British government. On the one hand, we've got this initiative where Rushnar Ali MP has been made this trade envoy, so the signal is that there is a particular focus and interest in developing that. But at the same time, for example, notwithstanding the fact that the Bangladeshi government in the United Kingdom has 3 bases in terms of their missions, Manchester, Birmingham, as well as London. Britain, on the other hand, processes all their visas far away in India. The effort and the initiative seems to be slightly confusing. What are your observations on that?
Well, I agree with that, and this issue is one that people feel very strongly about in the Bangladeshi community, in my constituency and elsewhere as well. I think I've had lots of representations about it. I've written to ministers about it. So far, ministers are saying, essentially, they are saving money by doing all this work in one place instead of doing it in Bangladesh and indeed in Sylhet at one stage. I think it's a false economy. I think it's damaging Britain's standing in Bangladesh, and I'm continuing to press ministers to reinstate the visa processing function in Bangladesh, where, after all, you're dealing with Bangladeshis. Those decisions ought to be made in the country where the people live, not another country many miles away.
Well, absolutely. And also, I've tried to do a bit of research in terms of finding out what precisely the savings are, but I couldn't actually find any, probably because it's too early to say. But in any event, either way, I dare say that in terms of the revenue itself, the fees that are being charged, it's not going to be a great deal of saving, because the man hours are going to have to be put in any event. And in Bangladesh, the British High Commission has an extensive presence there. So it could be perhaps accommodated in Dhaka, don't you think?
I think it could. And I understand, of course, government spending is under the cosh. They're very anxious to save money wherever they can. But I think it's not only about cost, it is also about confidence on the part of people in Bangladesh that fair decisions are being made. And I'm afraid at the moment that confidence has been weakened by the decision to move the processing outside Bangladesh.
Yes. Another thing that Mr. Chowdhury picked up on just before we went off on our break is the significance that Bangladesh places on education in terms of how it really is a #1 priority, and that they're really focusing a lot of energy into developing that in order to make sure that there's a bright future for the youth in Bangladesh. Whereas, comparatively speaking, in the United Kingdom, we have this government who is focusing on academization, and some would say, for example, with the increase in tuition fees and all sorts of other initiatives, that education does not appear to be that much of a priority, certainly for certain quarters of the public in the United Kingdom. What observations do you have in
Well, I think it's a great shame that the government does appear to have lost the previous focus on raising standards in education. Instead, they're talking about structures and changing every school into an academy by 2022. I think that's a mistake. I'm a member of the Education Select Committee. We will be meeting with the Secretary of State for Education tomorrow, and I think a lot of members of the committee, not just Labour members but Conservative members as well, are very doubtful about the wisdom of this proposal to force every secondary school, every primary school in the country to be an academy, to lose its links with the local authority, and particularly for primary schools, I think a lot of people feel that doesn't make sense. I was talking to a primary school head teacher the other day who said to me that as a maintained school today, a primary head teacher has all the autonomy they can want. If they disappear into a chain, which is what the government envisages for these new academies, who knows whether they will have the autonomy they need. So I think it's a mistake. I think it's the wrong thing to focus on. What the government should be focusing on instead is raising standards. That's what the Labour government did so successfully in London. That's what this government should be doing as well.
Well, Mr. Chowdhury's government is, of course, investing and throwing money at educational institutions in Bangladesh. In the United Kingdom, we see, I suspect, costs being the significant factor here, and that is why academization is being pushed so that there can be some cost savings, perhaps.
Well, actually, academization is quite costly. We estimate it'll cost £1.3 billion to turn all these schools into academies, because you've got to commission lawyers.
So why is the government doing this? Because their approach is it's going to be cost effective and it's going to be efficient and so forth. So why is the government doing this?
I think it's a very good question. That's exactly what we will be asking the Secretary of State at the Education Select Committee tomorrow. It's also the question a lot of Conservative MPs are asking: why on earth are they doing this? The evidence does not suggest it's going to raise standards in schools. Indeed, there is some evidence of standards going backwards in schools that have become academies. I think academies have got a very important part to play, but to force every school, whether or not it's the right thing for that school to become an academy, I think is a mistake, and it's a costly mistake.
In terms of Bangladesh, Mr. Chowdhury's party, as well as the other parties as well, have a lot of engagement of the youth and the masses in politics and in decision making in all levels of Bangladeshi politics and democracy and so forth. In the United Kingdom, people tend to be rather complacent. Certainly in terms of the British Bangladeshi community, well, let me ask you this. Would you like to see more engagement and interaction and integration by the British Bangladeshi community in politics and decision making and all sorts of other levels of governance in the United Kingdom?
Yes, I certainly would. I think it's one of the strengths of the Bangladeshi community in the UK that it has engaged so positively with politics, with the arts, with law, across the board, but we would like there to be more. That's why I was so pleased to see a good and very talented group of Bangladeshi students from my constituency in the House of Commons last night debating the EU referendum. That's why I'm so pleased that people like Rushnara Ali are MPs now in the House of Commons as role models for the next generation of young people. So I think the Bangladeshi community has set a pretty good record on this front. But of course we want to see more, and all of us need to work to make sure that Bangladeshi young people can make the most of the opportunities that Britain can provide to them over the coming years.
In terms of the British Bangladeshi community themselves, they still do remain considerably deprived. I know we've touched on this earlier on, but the reality is that opportunities are very limited. The work is not there. The economy is not as great as it has been in the past in the United Kingdom. The opportunities are very limited and so forth. Well, let me ask Mr. Chowdhury, because what Mr. Timms was touching on is the fact that he would like to see the British Bangladeshi community engaging and interacting more, and that they have already done very well. But the fact is, as you know, the British Bangladeshi community, especially the children, face greater challenges than their counterparts. So in terms of jobs and so forth, it's more difficult for them. What kind of thing do you think the British government should be doing? What sort of initiatives to encourage British Bangladeshi children to be, doing better? I mean, things like focusing on to hamlets and parts of East London and other parts of the country where there are contingents of Bangladeshis, perhaps.
My opinion is that rather than having a burden on you, give them a chance for them to explore. So they get good jobs, they face the interview, and they pass the interview. Whereas at the moment you see a lot of people I meet, they said that I couldn't just go through, I couldn't go through. Doctors, engineers, and others as well. So I think you should look into the matter in a very sympathetic way. That has to be on his qualification, obviously. I wouldn't give someone who is not qualified, make him or give him the job who is not qualified. If he has the qualification, look into the matter in a sympathetic way. If a girl is wearing hijab, and if you say that she's related to IS, it's not that. Because all our mothers, when the IS was not even born, grandmothers, they wear hijab and all that. So I think
Mahmud is absolutely
yes,
right about
I think
this.
you should give them a chance.
I mean, one area where I feel particularly strongly about this is the area of apprenticeships. We are expanding apprenticeships across the UK at the moment. The government has a target for 3 million apprenticeships before 2020. The evidence is that ethnic minority young people, Bangladeshi young people included, are not yet getting a fair share of those apprenticeships. That I think should change, and I think the government needs to work harder to extend equality of opportunity, specifically in the apprenticeships programme, to Bangladeshi and other ethnic minority young people. Young people are doing quite well in terms of getting into higher education, getting into university. The apprenticeships, the picture's not as good.
Mr. Chowdhury,
my saying is use them, use their skill, give them the opportunity, so they're not burdened to you.
And don't create barriers. Mr. Chowdhury actually raises an important point, doesn't he, when he talks about the stigmatization, if you will, about the community. So, for example, where people culturally or for whatever reason, when a person wears a hijab, where we see a particular climate of fear in the United Kingdom, and what that tends to, discreetly suggest is that this person may not be employable, may not reflect what a particular company should be presenting themselves as. That kind of, I don't know if it's covert racism, but that kind of stigmatization at the very least isn't very helpful, is it? Because it creates barriers, doesn't it?
And it's not helpful for the companies, because companies, employers need to be able to recruit from the broadest possible pool of talent. It's a terrible mistake for them, if they do this, to exclude some people on the basis of their dress or other concerns of that kind. The fact is that hijab-wearing young people in Britain have got a huge amount to contribute to employers and to the economy in the years ahead, and we need to make the most of that. I'm sometimes a little bit concerned about what the government says under its Prevent programme. The thing that worries me a little bit about that is if you listen to ministers talking about it, you sometimes get the impression that their view is that if you are a religious person, then you are a little bit suspect as a result of that. Now, I think that's a mistake. I think it's wrong to, of course, there is a problem about extremism, and that needs to be addressed. There's no question about that. But to say that religious people are more likely to be a risk, which sometimes is the impression you get from listening to ministers talking about this, I think that's a mistake. The reality is that young people, for example, who are regular at the mosque, are very, very unlikely to be posing a risk. So I think it's a mistake to confuse being religious with being suspect.
Do you think that if we had more role models within the British Bangladeshi community, not just MPs, but also in terms of entrepreneurship and academia and so forth, that then the wider community would be able to identify the British Bangladeshi community as being absolutely no different to the host community, because quite frankly, as Mr. Timms was saying, they have a lot to offer as well?
You see, look at yourself. You are a barrister. And we have about quite a few hundreds barristers those who are living here or living in Bangladesh, and they're doing very well. So we have a lot of things to learn from you because you've been educated here. And think about these students educated here, and if they're not getting a job, then they'll be bound to go elsewhere, do something else. Give them the opportunity. This is what I'm trying to say. And about the hijab, I say, you see, hijab is something is very religious minded, and I think in a lot of in France, in other places, they victimized on the hijabi people. That's not right. And the other thing is, I want to point out about, I want to go back to, before I forget, that is, we talked about this British High Commissioner in Bangladesh, High Commission in Bangladesh, and the visa system has gone to India. Why? Because I think we equals Bangladeshis and Indians, we equals the same. And you have a very big infrastructure in Bangladesh. British High Commission is very, very big. And maybe, and you are also taking fees from us to issue us the visa. Okay, you take our passports, you send it in England or wherever. But when we hear about that, our passports going to India for visas, look at this, few days ago there was this, prize-giving ceremony. This girl, she wanted to come to England or somewhere. She refused the visa, and eventually somebody intervened on that, and she was issued the visa. These sort of things will ruin the British image, because in Bangladesh we class the British people as very high class, and they're very good people in humanitarian ground or any other ground. Like I said before, you contribute more in our education than anything else, because you have realized that education is the first priority for the Bangladeshis to be educated.
Let me, if I may, just make my own position
Please.
clear on this. I'm not a supporter of the government. I'm in the opposition in Parliament, and I disagree strongly with this policy. And I think what I've observed, speaking to Bangladeshis about it, is that people feel affronted that the British government has shifted visa processing for Bangladeshis to another country hundreds of miles away. And I think it's a mistake for the British government to cause offence in that way.
Sure. We've only got a few minutes left before we finish this programme. I'd like you to tell our viewers what message you would like to leave them to think about. This is the, generally speaking, our viewers are the British Bangladeshi community, although this programme is actually broadcast throughout Europe. What message would you like to leave them with in terms of our discussions today about the relationship, particularly between the United Kingdom and Bangladesh, and of course generally about the British Bangladeshi people?
I think all of us need to continue to work for a very strong partnership between Britain and Bangladesh. I'm absolutely clear that is greatly in the interests of Britain in the future, and I believe it'll be in the interests of Bangladesh as well. In the interest of Britain, because we're seeing Bangladesh growing economically so rapidly, playing a bigger and bigger part in the world economy, and so offering opportunities for UK companies and firms for exchanges, and I hope all of us will work together to make the most of that opportunity. I want to see Bangladeshis in the UK playing an ever-increasing part in our society, in our culture, in our economy. I hope that British Bangladeshis will agree that Britain's place is in Europe, and therefore vote to remain in the European Union referendum at the end of June. I hope people will vote for the Labour candidate in the mayoral election in next week as well.
That's very, very encouraging and very inspiring. Mr. Chowdhury, we're coming to the end of our show. Already you've told us some very amazing detail and informative detail about Bangladesh and your experiences and so forth. What message would you like to leave with our viewers about the future, not just of the British Bangladeshi community, but also of Bangladesh? What would you like to tell them about
First of all, I'd like to say to the next generation of ours living in England, be loyal to England. And also, do not forget the roots. Because if you do not forget the roots, remember the roots and be loyal to England, to the British government, and that will help both the countries. Because I think my people living in this country, they've been very loyal to this British government. They're educated here, they're working here, and they are British Bangladeshis. But at the end, one time after 10-15 years, that will be pure British born in British Bangladeshis house. Yeah. So this is something we have to remember first, and also we have to, because we have links between Sylhet and London City, as you all know. So I think to help us on that, because these Sylheti, the British Bangladeshi people, when they go to Sylhet, they feel they are in England. And also the non-Sylhetis, they think this Sylhet is England. So we are linked up with you. We want more help, not free donation, but more help, giving us the brains behind some projects and to develop our country.
Mr. Chowdhury, Mr. Timms, thank you both very much for giving up your valuable time and sharing it with our respected viewers. Dear viewers, I must say, just by way of a small caveat, that although we have been discussing in some part the EU referendum as well as the London mayoralty, any views that have been expressed by our guests are not necessarily the views of Channel S Television. But I do hope you found this particular show informative. I certainly found it fascinating, a lot of detail that I hadn't known before, and in the coming weeks and months, we will of course be discussing a lot of similar issues and topics and bringing with you the best of guests available. Do stay watching Channel S Television, and of course, let's talk. Assalamu alaikum.